Standing by on the phone right now is Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the author of Heroes Proved. He's also the host of War Stories with Oliver North on the Fox News Channel. Colonel North, good friend, it's good to hear your voice this morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Brian. I appreciate the chance to be with you and Larry.
All right, so we wanted to bring you in here today because, you know, there's a lot of talk about Benghazi.
Yeah.
And they're going to have these hearings today where we're going to hear testimony from people who were on the ground, and it's going to be bombshell stuff. We're going to hear from Gregory Hicks, the number 2 man in Benghazi from the State Department. We're going to hear from the Eric Nordstrom, again, who was the regional security officer. Then we're going to hear from Mark Thompson, who was the deputy coordinator for ops and counterterrorism at the State Department. And one of the things that I think is going to come clear through the testimony is there was really no effort to try to help the guys out in Benghazi who were under attack. Not during the first attack on the consulate there, and not on the second attack against the annex. And this sort of goes against, you know, what we've always believed, especially in the military in this country, is that we don't leave people behind. When somebody's in trouble, we do everything we possibly can to try to help the situation. As a former Marine, or I'm sorry, a retired Marine, how do you feel about that?
Well, let me just compare what happened in Benghazi to some events that I was intimately familiar with back in the Reagan administration, you know, 20 years, 30 years earlier, where we didn't have a lot of the capabilities we have today. First of all, the 9/11 anniversary is always going to be a major terrorist opportunity. They see it that way. It's part of their ideology. And not to have prepared by placing forces in the region that could quickly respond as a matter of course, not to have beefed up our embassy securities throughout that part of the world that has been so unsettled ever since the famous Cairo speech, was lunacy. And I think part of the cover-up that we've seen, and that is the right word for what we've seen, it's not simply changing talking points. This has been a massive cover-up of incompetence at best, malevolence at worst, and the kinds of misfeasance that, should we not correct it, is likely to lead to this kind of thing in the future. So let's look at the specifics of what could have been done. There was, as we know from testimony and from an anonymous source that was on with Fox News the other day, that there was a interdiction force, what they call a Commanders in Extremis force, a SIF, about a 40-some-odd man unit plus a support element of the 10th the 10th Special Forces Group in Croatia. Well, if you draw a straight line from Croatia to the Benghazi airfield, you've got about a 3.5-hour trip. It's inconceivable to me that they didn't have air assets, because that's how they always deploy. What is also inconceivable to me is that the commanders on the ground, who were linked in by secure video and secure radio and secure telephone to all of what was going on out there, didn't start acting on their own. In other words, the purpose of a SIF is to be responsive to the theater commander, in this case European Command, and to, in the case of Libya, the Africa Command. And they're all in Germany, those commands. Mm-hmm. I mean, all you have to do is walk down the hall in Stuttgart and you can find each other. It's inconceivable to me that their operations watch officers and the like didn't immediately start talking to one another. And if permissions were denied or everybody said, no, let's see how it develops and all that, we'll know, because all of those communications chains were theoretically investigated by this so-called Accountability Review Board, which included a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a former ambassador who, I point out, and this is news, Tom Pickering, who was the co-chairman of this so-called investigation, received enormous backup support when he was threatened as our ambassador in El Salvador. I know. I wrote the op order. When he was threatened down there, we put lots of additional security in El Salvador, and we had soldiers, sailors, and Marines die down there in the mission of protecting Tom Pickering.
Wait, this was in the early parts of the Reagan administration, when you were with the National Security Council?
Early 1980s, absolutely.
And Thomas Pickering, the man who was the co-chair of this Accountability Review Board that Hillary Clinton put together, he himself was under threat as an ambassador.
He was the beneficiary of a quick response by an administration that really did care about their ambassadors.
But Ollie, they didn't do anything, and doesn't that run counter to what we believe in the U.S. military?
No, this whole thing runs counter to it, Brian. I mean, that's the point here. I mean, not only did they not prepare in anticipation,
they didn't even try.
Things might go wrong out there. So, in leading up to the event, nothing was done. During the event, nothing is done, and in the aftermath, they had a cover-up. I mean, this is. If it were Richard Nixon, the articles of impeachment would already be drawn up.
Colonel North, there's another aspect of this that I think you can lend some personal expertise to, and that is, if memory serves, you testified before Congress over a controversial issue at one point.
I seem to recall.
I seem to recall that. Yes.
And boy, did they destroy you. And I wonder, I mean, honestly, if you look at what's going to happen today, one of the only ways they can protect Secretary of State Clinton and President Obama is to go after these whistleblowers. What do you expect? Will they have the temerity to do so?
Larry, without going into who it is, I know one of these gentlemen very, very well. I have enormous admiration for him. We have some history together. I'll say it on the air. My advice is answer the question. There's going to be a lot of grandstanding by members of Congress. There's people on both sides of the aisle will make speeches instead of asking questions. Answer the questions very directly. If you don't know the answer, tell them, and offer to get back to them. And don't make things up. I mean, don't create anything. Don't destroy anything. And if you've got friends that are out there vulnerable, go tell them to get a good lawyer. And these guys do have good lawyers.
Or a potted plant, depending on
No, my lawyer was not a potted
not a potted plant.
Yeah.
We remember.
Not a potted plant. I'm the lawyer here.
All right. Yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, thank you so much for joining us and bringing in your personal views on it.
I was there the day that Ollie testified.
Were you?
I was covering the hearings. I covered him in the early part of my career and became a colleague with him in the later part of my career. And I got to tell you, I'll never forget when Ollie stood up to take the oath. It's sort of like thunder. There were so many cameras clicking. It was a moment I'll never forget.
Yeah, same here. All right. Thanks for joining us today, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver.